work at a gas station in New Zealand, and despite the downside of terrible customers, I have genuinely always loved my job. The station I started at has a lot of homeless people, or people who do have a home but are hard off and still beg. One homeless man in particular is my stalker. When I first started, I was told by my coworker that this man would come in and we would give him a free cup of hot water, to which he would add some sugar packets to help him get by. They said he's a bit weird but harmless beside his tendencies to swear a lot. Him being homeless and all made me feel sorry for him, especially in the wintertime when I first heard of him, so I happily provided him with his water. This man, however, wouldn't get the water and leave. He would rant and rave about all kinds of nonsense, and I could never understand what he was on about. It was the F word every second and nonsense every other. Some coworkers stopped letting him in as he disturbed customers, but me and one other coworker would. I guess the problem began here because he would stop coming in during the day, and whenever somebody else was in, even my workmates who would still serve him said after a while he never saw him anymore. He would just come in when I was there alone. I worked 2 p.m. to 11 p.m. and he would always come at night. Every day without fail he would come in at night and linger. Never on my days off would this man come, and my days off are different each week, so he had to have done a walk-by during the day to know when I was working, which I also saw him do all the time. I started to become uncomfortable with his presence and the way he looked at me, but being raised in a Christian family made me reluctant to turn him away. My grandpa always said to me as a kid, "Manners are cheap, and never turn your back on charity." So I didn't. But he started to make comments about my looks and then my body, and he stopped asking for water. He just wanted me. He would come in, beeline straight to me, and linger in the store for what felt like hours. My final straw was when he winked at me and said I always had a friend in him. The way he said it made my blood run cold, so I stopped letting him in. The minute I went to sole charge, I locked the doors as I knew he would appear. The problem was I knew this man was watching me. I could sense it, and the minute the final customers left the forecourt, he was approaching the doors. I actually caught him watching me from alleyways and bushes multiple times a day. We got this man trespassed and hoped this would work. It didn't. He'd watch me, try to get in, and scream at me through the doors when I wouldn't let him in. Of course, I was calling the police every time he arrived, but he'd escape every time. For months and months on end, I was scared 24/7 at work and having nightmares at home. This went on for so long I couldn't list half the times he harassed me, tried to get in, or I saw him watching me. But the worst incident was when I was on forecourt duty, filling cars and cleaning the pumps. We have speakers at all pumps which are connected to an intercom inside so we can communicate with customers outside without having to run out there. It's a big site with 12 pumps. I was outside when I heard my coworker call me inside from the speakers. Her voice panicked. It was daytime, so my first thought was a customer was being difficult. I came inside and instantly heard the doors lock behind me. "Look over by the bushes," she said with wide eyes. I did, and sure enough, there he was, peering in. The scariest part? He was standing with one foot lunged forward like he was ready to run and pounce the minute the doors opened. My heart dropped and I called the police, who arrived insanely fast, as in they were there as I hung up the phone. The officer taking the statement told me he would be charged with criminal harassment and a restraining order was in place. The downside was legally they have to give a warning before he can be arrested for it, and he was released the same night. But enough was enough. I couldn't do it anymore, and I was scared all the time. It wasn't a question if he would be back, but when. I handed in my 2 weeks' notice the very next day. Management did want to lose me and offered me a site transfer to a site a good distance away that he'd never find me at least that's what we all thought. I agreed to take the transfer, and I moved to this new site, and it was great. All staff were told not to tell anybody where I had gone, even the regulars. They were to say I no longer work for this company. For around 3 months, it was blissful. No stalker, a fresh start, and I felt safe. I wasn't looking over my shoulder every 2 seconds, but the relief didn't last long. Only about a month ago, I was informed by the officer handling my case I had to appear in court and testify against him. I was terrified of seeing him again, but I told myself it was for the best. I had just accepted I could do it, and I would send him where he belongs when the worst happened. He found me here. I don't know how he did it, but my best guess is he asked a new employee at my old site who didn't know about him and the stalking and restraining order, and they told him. He must have caught a bus in or made an incredibly long walk. This man was approaching the doors quickly when I saw him and bolted. I nearly knocked over my boss, who saw my face and asked what was wrong. I can't even remember what I said in my state of shock and fear, but my manager locked us in her office, and she was amazingly supportive. She rang the police and handled everything. I was shaking and in shock. We all thought I was safe here. The police officer in charge said he'd never find me here. Whilst we had the police on the phone, we saw him circle the site at least 3 times before the police arrived, found him, and arrested him. Thank God. Safe to say I got no sleep the next few days waiting for court. The fear of him being released was too much. 2 days before court, I prayed. I prayed he'd get convicted and I would be safe. I honestly have no idea what I would do if he was released and he knew where to find me again. This may sound dramatic, but anybody who has experienced the trauma of being stalked will understand. I even made the comment, if he gets away, I think I might end myself. I truly felt that hopeless. Praise the Lord, my prayers were answered. The next day, the officer handling my case called me. I've got some good news. He changed his plea to guilty. I was at work and jumped up and down in front of customers. This is the safest I've felt in nearly a year, the longest year of my life. But it's over for now, mostly. I have a sentencing case coming up where it will be determined how long he gets, but for now I will relax knowing this monster is off the streets, and most importantly, can't get anywhere near me. Deep down, I know it's not over. My gut tells me when he's released, he'll be back. This man is obsessed and mentally ill. The only thing getting me by is that saying, don't borrow trouble before it shows up at your doorstep. But that's the problem. I know he will be back at the doorstep as soon as he can. Strange things can happen to anyone at any time, so hopefully my encounter will encourage you to be more aware of your surroundings. This event happened to me when I was a sophomore in high school. I am now a junior at university. It was a beautiful Sunday in late May, and everyone was excited for summer break. I knew that soon I would have to start my summer job, so I decided to go for a bike ride so that I could have some time myself before I start working. I embarked on my 30-ish mile journey at around 3 p.m. The town I lived in at the time is home to the start of a long walking biking trail that takes you directly to a larger nearby city. I planned to ride the trail to the city, explore a bit, and ride back before dark. I set off on my journey and I was enjoying the late afternoon sun as well as the sounds of nature. The ride to the city went extremely smoothly, no problems whatsoever. The problems started when I first arrived on the outskirts of the city. I should add that this is a very safe area. Minimal crime, and there are many large shopping centers nearby, such as Sam's Club and Walmart, meaning there are always people around. When on the trail, you cross a bridge that goes over a very busy road. Then immediately after crossing said bridge, you make a left and the path continues parallel to the road below. The path eventually connects to the shoulder of the road just for a short distance. I am biking up the path parallel to the road and eventually reach the part where it connects to the shoulder. Where the path meets the road, there is an intersection with stoplights. I'm going to try to explain this part as best I can, so bear with me. I was going to turn right at this intersection, which would take me in the area with Walmart and Sam's Club. I glanced on the opposite side of the road, and in the left turn lane there was a car whose passenger was standing on the road, yelling and banging on the window of the person who was in the straight lane. I remember thinking to myself, road rage much? But I made my turn and kept on my way, not thinking anything at all. Since I was turning right and the car with the road rage guy was turning left, that meant that they would pass by me when their light changed and allowed them to execute their turn. Sure enough, I felt their car come up behind me. There is no sidewalk on this portion of road that I was on, so I temporarily had to hug close to the curb. Since I knew that they could be trouble, I kept my head forward and didn't react as they drove past me. As they go by, I hear them yelling expletives at me as well as calling me things that could be considered offensive. I don't really pay too much attention to them as they pass, however, I do notice the passenger's head out the window. The vehicle was speeding quite heavily, but from what I could tell, the passenger had a dark hoodie or mask covering his entire face. I didn't really know what it was at the time, but I would soon find out. Before going any further, I should explain how this area is set up. Basically, from where I was, Walmart and Sam's Club were in the back left corner. If I continued biking straight on the street I was on, I'd end up behind a long strip mall. This is where those guys drove, and it was where I was originally planning on going. When I saw that's where they went, I noped out and pulled off in front of some closed shops. I pulled out my phone and called my mom to tell her what had happened because I was honestly so confused as to what just went down. I wish this is where it ended. We talked for a couple of minutes, and I kid you not, the second I hung up, I see the car pull up right next to me. I remember thinking, what could these guys possibly want? The passenger opened the door and swung his legs onto the ground. It took a minute to realize what I was seeing. The guy was wearing an extremely detailed devil mask. I was so confused, and we just looked at each other for about 5 seconds. Then my senses kicked in, and I pushed forward on the pedal to get the heck out of there. Devil Mask then sprinted from the passenger seat to block me from going anywhere. At this point, he raised his fists and started rocking them up and down, like a boxer does when they are sizing up their opponent. He was about 6 inches from my face, his fists half the distance. In this kind of situation, you always think you'd be tough, but believe me, when your fight reaction gets denied, it is hard to do anything but freeze. I wasn't sure if he was trying to rob me or what, so I kept my eyes on his fist to make sure that they weren't going to reach for anything. I remember saying, "Man, what are you doing? Just please don't hurt me." I know, it sounds pretty weak, but that's all I could manage to get out. After several seconds, he jumps back in his car and the driver floors it, going down the wrong way of a one-way parking lot. I honestly do not recall if the driver of the vehicle had a mask on or not. Either way, it was still creepy. I didn't even think to get the plate numbers of the car. What I do know is that the vehicle was a red Honda Accord sedan from around the 2007 model year. Luckily, a couple doors down in the strip mall was my then neighbor's business. Thankfully, he was there, being it was a Sunday. I was able to stop in and explain what just happened. We both stepped out to look for the car, but to no avail. I called my mom from there, and she came to pick up my bike as she was already in the area. I stayed in my neighbor's office for some time, and then I rode home with him. Our conversation on the way home mainly consisted of self-defense tactics, and he told me stories about some sketchy experiences he has had. He said one day he was coming out of the same office, and there was a group of several people who surrounded him, blocking him from entering his vehicle. I cannot recall how that story ended, but it changed my perception on what I thought was a safe area. Honestly, the experience was pretty spooky and all, but I would say I was more confused than anything. First of all, it was the middle of the day on a Sunday, so there was a lot of people out and about. So if these guys meant harm, why were they doing it when anyone could easily see them? Although they were menacing, I am pretty sure they were doing it just to get a scare out of people, and I just happened to be a victim of one of their pranks. These pranksters will eventually mess with the wrong person who will either beat them senseless or pull a firearm. I can tell you these guys did not seem harmless, as I felt very threatened, especially when the masked man ran to cut me off. So to the weird devil-masked man and his accomplice, I hope we don't see each other again. I mean that too, as I now carry the necessary tools to protect myself wherever I go. For all I know, you could be listening to this right now, since you probably enjoy spooky things. To wrap up my story, I urge everyone to carry mace, a blade, and anything that you legally can do so. And please, watch your surroundings. I was 17 when this happened. I live in Finland and never really felt unsafe. Of course, I knew that people got harassed, etc., but it never happened to me, and I never thought it would happen to me. I was walking home from the grocery store pretty late at night at around 8 p.m. It was winter, so it had gotten dark hours ago, and it was incredibly cold outside, so I decided to take a shortcut. A bad idea, I know. The shortcut to my apartment was next to a few terrible bars that were full of local drunks since it was a weekend night. As I was walking past the bars, I saw a man walking behind me. I could tell he was intoxicated from the way he was walking. This spiked up my anxiety immediately, and as I started walking faster, he did too. He was getting pretty close to me, and I could hear a zipper being pulled down. A short zipper, like the one in his jeans. Now, I was full-on panicking and decided to call someone. I pressed the first number on my contact list, and it just happened to be my sister's girlfriend at the time. As soon as she picked up, I loudly told her where I was and what was happening. I think the man heard me because after that, he turned and started walking the other direction. I got home safe after all, but as soon as I closed my apartment door, I broke down. I was so scared. I had never experienced anything like that before. I know this story may not sound scary to some people, but I'm sure I'll never forget it. And I sure learned my lesson to never take a shortcut home alone, late at night. I'm an 18-year-old student, and I take the train and bus to school and back. And since I'm a female, my boyfriend likes walking me to the station since my school city isn't the safest of all. But on day one, he accepted a ride home from his sister who works in a drugstore near our school, so I didn't mind and gladly walked back to the station alone. I missed my train and waited in the underground tunnel since it was very hot outside, and the tunnel had a lot of shade and was a bit less over-the-top hot. And this guy shows up and walks up to me. He looked to be in his mid-30s to me, but he could have been older. And he asked if I was still in school, which I said yes to, since I was, and I was hoping that would kind of scare him off since he never asked my age. So I guess he would think maybe I was underage, which I was kind of hoping for, and he would leave me alone. So he asked me some more useless questions about school, but never which school I go to or what I do. He then asked which train I took, which I answered correctly, but I lied about taking the bus, so he would think I lived in the city. He said that he took the same train and had the same stop, and that creeped me out a lot, and I was hoping he didn't ask to go together, which he didn't ask, thank God. He then asked if I had a boyfriend, and I told him I had one, and that bummed him out since he was looking for a girlfriend, apparently. He talked a bit more about that and asked some more about my boyfriend, but I never mentioned any names of him or me because he didn't ask, and I would have made up some names, of course. So the man eventually says he will stop bothering me and then asked for a freaking kiss when he said goodbye. I turned that down. Then he asked for a hug. I turned that down as well, and then he tried a handshake, so I gave him one. But then when he leaves, he goes the wrong direction. He walked all the way to this underground tunnel. He had to go through the station first to get there, and going in the tunnel means you wish to take the train, but then he just leaves where he came from. I kind of think that's suspicious. Why go to the train station if you aren't going to take a train? After he left, I directly got up the stairs onto my parent. I had to be where people could see me and called my boyfriend about this. He was so angry that it happened the moment he wasn't there with me. I think I should have reported this at the locket since this happened in sight of security cameras, and to be honest, I feel stupid I didn't. When I was in 5th grade, I lived quite close to my school and often walked home by myself. My parents got me a phone at the beginning of the year so I could call or text them and let them know I was home safe. For the first half of the school year, everything was great. I loved walking home and felt like an adult because of it. Enter the stereotypical white van. At first, the van was no big deal. I assumed they lived in the area as I would see it drive around quite often. I hadn't seen the driver. He didn't try to speak to me, and he never slowed down when he passed me while I walked home. It was no big deal, just a strange-looking van that someone nearby drove. The first incident occurred at my school. I was walking back to my school for violin lessons. School ended at 3 p.m. and lessons were at 4:45, so I would usually go home and take the dog out, eat a snack, grab my violin, and make my way back to campus. As always, I was walking alone with just my phone and a big violin on my back. I started to hear this strange noise when I made it to the school's parking lot. I, being the oblivious person I was, finally realized the noise was coming from behind me and looked over my shoulder to see what was causing it. The van. It crept behind me at a snail's pace about 20 feet away. The school was basically empty. Everyone who was there was already inside the building. Now, I may have been oblivious, but I knew when it was time to remove myself from the situation. I sprinted to the music room door and started pounding on it, pretty frantically. There was no outside handle, and someone had to open it for me to get in. The van very calmly sped up to a normal pace and left the parking lot before my very concerned music teacher opened the door. I made up some story about a really spooky bug chasing me or something like that and kept that event to myself. I'd convinced myself that I overreacted, and it was probably some parent that had just dropped off their kid and was texting while pulling away. The next, and luckily final, incident happened a few weeks later. There had been a lack of creepy white vans, and I stupidly assumed the driver had moved away or gotten a better car. By this point, I was back to my normal self, walking home and hanging out with just my dog until my parents got home or my older brother got back from his friend's house. On this particular day, there wasn't school. I believe it was during spring break, but my friend who lived directly behind me and was a little older than me suggested we walk to my school and play on the playground. Both my parents worked 9-to-5 jobs, so I called my dad and let him know we were going to the playground and that I'd call when we got home so someone could be aware of where we were. Playground is fun. We stay for like 2 hours and then decide it's time to go home because it's hot and my phone had died. We walk our normal route, and as we turn onto her street, my stomach drops, and I panic because there's the van. It's past her cul-de-sac and it looks to be parked, but I just got this really bad vibe. I tell her that we should run the rest of the way because this van is creepy, and she agrees. We take off, cutting through yards and trying not to stumble over any lawn decorations. Turns out van is not parked. The guy must have just been sitting in his car, waiting. I think he probably saw us go to the school and just waited for us to come back. The van makes this awful squealing noise when this guy tries to speed towards us, and it gives us a tiny bit of a head start, which, turns out, may have saved us. We both slam against her front door, crying and panicking. No one is home, so the door is locked. She pulls out her keys and drops them while trying to unlock the door. She scoops them up right as the van comes to a screeching halt in front of the driveway. She managed to open the door, and we both scrambled inside at the exact moment we hear the van's driver's side door open. The driver's side was turned away from us. That gave us a little extra time, too. I slammed the door behind us, locked the deadbolt in the handle before closing the curtains over the window on the door. I'm hyperventilating and crying, but my friend pulls herself together enough to make sure the other doors are locked. She had a living room with a bay window that faced the road. The window had no curtains, so it wasn't hard to see the house. She runs out of the room, and I hear her drop to the floor and start frantically whispering at me. I ran towards her, and she held up a hand to tell me to stop and pointed at the window. Terrified, I peeked out from behind a wall to look out the window, and there he was. The van's driver looked like a homeless Santa Claus with a hint of meth, and he was just standing on the passenger side of the van, staring into the house with this dead expression on his face. We both hid behind the wall and silently cried for probably 25 minutes, too terrified to find a phone to call the police. Finally, after what felt like hours, but couldn't have been more than 30 minutes, we heard the van make the squealing noise and popped our heads around the corner in unison to see the van speed off and leave the neighborhood. Did we call the police? No. I had never called 911 before, and I was scared we would get in trouble for something like that, being out alone. Dumb, I know. Instead, we called our parents, who seemed sympathetic but obviously didn't believe us because they were not particularly concerned. We both cried some more and questioned if it had really even happened, before triple-checking all the locks and watching a movie to distract us until our parents came home. A few months ago, I adopted a dog, and ever since I started taking him for walks, it has opened up many opportunities for weird and creepy encounters. My dog is a Dalmatian, very handsome and very friendly, so he draws a lot of attention to us. Everyone wants to come over to say hello and give him pats. I'm a very shy, anxious person, but since getting him, I have been able to come out of my shell and feel more comfortable interacting with strangers, which is the opposite of how I was before. Dalmatians require a lot of exercise, and on a regular day, we do around 10 kilometers worth of walking. We live in a cute little town with lots of historical homes, and most of the locals here know each other. A lot of the time, I will pick a route that takes us through a nice park and streets lined with heritage homes from the mid-1800s. On one of these routes, we always passed a house where an old man lived, and every time we went by, he was tending to his garden or having a friendly chat with someone who had stopped. One day he said hello to me, and I politely said hello back as I walked by. For a while, we would either wave to each other or say a quick hello. I usually walk at a brisk pace because that's how my dog likes it, and one day, as we went by the man's house, he commented that I was always in a hurry. I laughed it off and joked that this is the pace my dog prefers to walk me at. Then one morning, as we walked past his house and I said a polite hello the way I did every other day, the old guy asked if there was a chance I might have some time to stop in and have a coffee with him. He explained that he was very, very lonely. His wife had died and he really missed having someone to chat with. Now, I have a pretty soft spot for the old folks. My grandfather and I are very close, and he is extremely important to me, and he has been struggling since my grandma passed and he was left on his own. I visit him when I can, but he lives in a different country, so we talk a lot on Skype instead. I was caught totally off guard by the old guy and really didn't know how to respond. I'm a pretty antisocial person and really awkward around strangers, so the idea was horrifying to me because of my social anxiety. Not because I felt that it was unsafe to go into a stranger's house and let them make me a drink. I was pretty hesitant at first. I find dealing with strangers really draining because it's stressful even though I'm medicated for anxiety. But I thought about my grandfather. Every week he tells me how lonely he is and how much he misses my grandma. I always feel helpless that I can't be there with him in person, so I thought that I would be doing a good thing giving this lonely guy some company. I also had my dog with me, so at least I wasn't going in all alone. I never feel unsafe when he's by my side. Most people see a Dalmatian and think, "Oh, how sweet," but actually their temperament is very similar to a German Shepherd, so not a dog you want to anger. I went inside the old guy's house, and it was pretty standard. Lots of old furniture, family photos, and just a pretty regular old person's home. He invited me to take a seat while he put the coffee on and we chatted. He talked about his life, his kids and grandkids, and thanked me profusely for being so trusting and willing to have coffee with him. Then he started to lay on the compliments pretty heavy. I'm a female in my 20s and normally wear 1940s clothing. It's a personal aesthetic preference, not because I'm some sort of fundy zealot or right-wing nutjob. When I take the dog out, however, I keep things low-key. I don't have my hair set and I don't wear makeup. So usually I'm in a plain dress and wear a big hat because I live in Australia and it's hot. My appearance that day was certainly not worth complimenting, that's for sure. I was looking especially greasy and sweaty from our long walk and the heat, but I was polite and thanked him, saying he was far too generous with his words. The rest of the conversation was pretty innocent and the coffee was decent. My dog chilled on the floor next to me and was not at all stressed, which I took as a good sign since he is a very good judge of character. The old guy then started telling me how much he hated his wife and how miserable their marriage had been. Well, That's awkward for me. He said he was relieved that she was dead and that now he's able to live his life. Both of them were Greek immigrants to Australia in the 1950s, and their marriage was arranged by their families. I listened to him without knowing what exactly I was supposed to say. It was pretty weird and TMI to unload on a stranger, more the sort of thing you go to a therapist for. He went on about he always loved beautiful women, but never cheated on his wife because he was a nice guy, even though they didn't really have a relationship. This was followed by complimenting me some more, which at this point was getting too weird because I looked awful and probably smelled even worse from the heat and the walking. He asked me if I had friends that were like me, as in dress vintage, and I said that yes, in fact I did. To which he replied he would love to meet them and that I should bring them over and maybe we could all go out to lunch. After an hour, my dog got restless and that was my cue to leave. The old guy asked me if I'd be back another time and I awkwardly said sure, because as odd as some of what he told me was, it wasn't really that bad, and I kind of felt obliged that I had already gone in and had coffee with him once, or at least that's my anxious, socially awkward mind's way of thinking. I had a habit of going along with stuff that I really don't want to do sometimes because I hate letting people down or risk upsetting them. I'd rather have a terrible time doing something that I don't enjoy than disappoint someone. I didn't go back for a month because I kept going back and forth with myself because I wasn't exactly dying to go back, but I felt like it was probably the right thing to do, and I'd already said I would. My neighbor is a lovely old lady, and we chat fairly frequently, so since everyone in this town knew each other, I decided to ask her about the old guy to get a bit of information and some background check on him that I reasoned would help me decide whether I would go back again. And sure enough, my neighbor knew the guy. She worked around the corner from his house and knew him and his wife. She only had nice things to say and assured me that he was harmless. I ended up going by his house and arranged another coffee date for the following week. This time, I turned up without my dog and had my hair and makeup done and was wearing a nice dress and hat, 1940s style as usual, and wasn't sweaty or reeking of BO since I'd come straight from my house. Normally, if I'm going somewhere or meeting someone, I will put effort into looking presentable because I see that as the polite thing to do. This time, the guy had covered the whole table with different traditional Greek sweets and encouraged me to help myself, which I did, since it would be rude not to and the food was pretty tasty. I had chatted with him while he finished making the coffee and then he tried to give me a hug. I am very, very reserved when it comes to physical affection. I don't even hug my family members or friends unless it's a special occasion. It just isn't my thing, not at all. But I recognize certain cultures are more physical and it's a normal thing to give someone a hug, so I didn't want to be rude or insensitive. And then a few minutes later, he wanted another hug, and another, and another, at which point the hugs also included kisses on the cheek and face, at which point I was horrified and really struggling not to freak out. I still brushed this off as a culture thing and decided not to make a fuss since I know certain European cultures are like that. We sat down to eat and he again brought up how awful his wife was and how they slept in separate beds and never had any fun. Again, very awkward and I had no idea what to say and tried changing the subject. No matter how hard I tried to keep the conversation lighthearted and change topics frequently, he would keep coming back to that. And then he decided to bring up my private life with my husband and started asking questions which no one should ask, which is a big nope. So I decided to say that my husband and I are both asexuals and that we were both celibate, and stressed the fact that it was not only something I was not only not interested in doing, it was definitely not something I wanted to talk about. As stupid and trusting as I was to get myself into this situation, this is where I realized that I messed up really badly, and needed to figure out how to get myself out of there. Yeah, you better believe I felt stupid that I had been eating and drinking the guy's food this whole time. Oh boy. The asexual comment had done nothing to diffuse the topic. If anything, it only made things way worse. One thing I know about predators and their instincts is that you must never trigger their prey drive. If you go into flight response, then that will make them go after you before you had the chance to figure out how to get out of there. My dog loves ripping small wild animals to pieces, so I guess I've learned a thing or two about predators and how they make their moves. So instead of freaking out and giving the guy a piece of my mind, I kept calm. I just sat there and listened to him go on about how he had many opportunities to cheat on his wife, but didn't because he's such a nice guy. He said how even though he is 84, he definitely didn't feel his age, and asked if I knew anyone my age who might be interested in a relationship with him. What about those girlfriends of mine who dress vintage? Would they be interested? I explained that they were all in their early 20s, and he said that it didn't bother him at all and that he preferred young women, not old ones, and that I should definitely bring some friends over next time I came over. Yeah, for sure. I played along for a little while longer and then said it was time for me to head off. I remained cordial and let him give me a tour of his garden, my way of securing my exit, and assured him I would be back, and that I'd bring my friends next time too, the really good-looking ones. I went home, told my neighbor the whole story. She could not stop apologizing, and we had a good laugh about it. I still take my dog for walks in the same area every day, but specifically, avoid that street. I had this bizarre and chilling experience back in 1999. At the time, I was working at one of the national institutes in Mexico. For reference, I was born in the US, but as fate would have it, I ended up working in a semi-high position at this institute and raising my family in Mexico. I recently changed from working in the area where I had been for some years to another area. Same job level, but a totally different physical space and set of responsibilities. It was a pretty big challenge for me, and given my high work ethic, I naturally want to excel in my new position as quickly as possible. It was Friday, and I had several reports that I wanted to be ready for Monday, and my daughters were away with their father, so I decided to work from my office that night after the rest of the staff had gone, so I could focus without distractions. By late evening, there were still a few people finishing up working. I could hear their murmurs and an occasional crescendo of laughter, but little by little it grew silent. I decided to take a short break and open my door for the first time in a couple of hours. As expected, most of the lights were off, but it was bright enough to move about, so I decided to stretch my legs a bit and walk down the hallway to the main building. Now, the main entrance to the building opens up to an impressive 4-story open patio, 3 sides of which are lined with the interior office windows along the halls. I could see a few lights still on and could hear the muffled voices of people still trying to get some late-night work done like me. This was the original building where my office used to be, but in my new position, my office was located in a recently built wing. I returned to my office and got back to work on my reports. I decided to leave my office door open just because there was no need to shut it since everyone was gone. 20 or 30 minutes had gone by when suddenly I heard the curious noise of what sounded like a ball bouncing down the hallway. Strange, given the time and place, but I figured that someone had come in with their kid to get something done, so I decided to get up and close my office door again. I could just imagine the soon-to-come voice of a loud child, or worse yet, children, forced to come into work with one of their parents on a Friday night, and frankly, I just wanted to finish up and go home. I got back to my computer and was immediately focused on my numbers again, but after a few minutes went by, I didn't hear any follow-up voices. I thought it was odd. You know, like when someone calls out to you and you answer and then they say nothing. But I thought that maybe the kid's ball had accidentally bounced into the hallway of the new wing from the main building, been recovered, and they had left, so I returned to work. A few minutes later, I heard the faint sound of the ball bouncing again. I stopped working and mindfully waited to hear the voices that would normally accompany the sound of a bouncing ball, but they never came. Now, I like spooky things just as much as the next guy, maybe a little more, but this seemed a little too odd for my comfort, and quite honestly, I was beginning to feel that eerie, nervous feeling. I took a deep breath, shook my head, and decided to brush it off. Besides, what could happen? Several minutes passed while I worked away, and then I heard it again. But this time it sounded like the ball was bouncing on the other side of my office. That meant that my office was now between the main building and the ball. There was no way that anyone could have gotten past my office without me hearing something. I was officially freaked out, but remained rational. I figured that there were only two possibilities. The ball had bounced away from the kid, who was either too scared to walk down the dark hallway alone or not given permission to retrieve it, or the kid had quietly run past my office door and grabbed the ball without me hearing this. Either way, I was not happy about it. I decided to call out and see if anyone would answer, but no one did. I wasn't able to focus anymore, so I called it quits and packed up my work to go home for the night. I carefully opened my office door and peered out, looking up and down the hallway before exiting my office. Why did I do that? Well, like I said, I was definitely having an eerie feeling. There was no ball and no one to be seen. I closed my door behind me and started for the exit to the main building, and then I heard it. The distinct sound of a ball bouncing behind me raised the hair on the back of my neck. I spun around and froze. There was nothing there. I never thought that something like that could happen to me, but there I was, standing there like a statue. My mind was racing, and without thinking, I called out in Spanish, "Is anyone there?" I could just hear scary movie cliché oozing from my ears, but it was the only thing that occurred to me. No one answered. That was good enough for me. I was just about to get out of there when I heard it again, but this time it sounded like the ball was bouncing away from me, just around the corner of the end of the hallway. That was it. My heart was racing, but my mind desperately needed some rationalization, and I did what I always criticize in horror movies. I went to investigate. The sound faded away as if the ball had stopped bouncing. When I got to the end of the hallway, I slowly looked around the corner and was immediately overwhelmed with the most horrific stench of decay. I've smelled dead animals enough to know what that stench is, but this almost made me vomit right then and there. I threw my hand over my nose and mouth, turned around and got out of there. I never did see a ball. But my story doesn't stop there. During the weekend, I calmed down and of course let my rational brain wrap around my experience. There must have been a dead mouse or something trapped somewhere in the wall, and as for the sound of the bouncing ball, I rationalized that it must have been something that just sounded like a bouncing ball. After all, there was all sorts of computer equipment in the area and a special AC unit, so that must have been it. That and my wild imagination. So Monday morning, when I arrived for work, the place was already busy with people working here and there. I walked into my office, dropped off my suit, and headed back out for coffee. I decided to walk toward the end of the hallway first to make sure that the smell was gone, and sure enough, it was. I mentally patted myself on the back for being right and went to the secretarial area to get some coffee. There were several people there doing the same, and I nonchalantly commented to them in Spanish, "Hey, I guess the security guards reported the dead animal at the end of the hall." They all looked at me completely confused, realizing they obviously wouldn't have known what I was talking about because they weren't there during the weekend, I explained. That's when they all exchanged a look that made my heart drop to my gut. My assistant was among the group and asked if she could speak with me in my office. That made me feel somewhat nervous, but played it cool, and she said she would meet me there in a few minutes. I got my coffee and returned to my desk. A few minutes later, she knocked and came in with one of the veteran department heads, and they shut the door behind them. Now, I was really getting curiously nervous. She asked me if I would mind telling her what happened, and I simply told her that I had smelled a dead animal at the end of the hallway Friday night, but that it was gone now, so obviously security had notified maintenance and someone had recovered it. There it was again. They exchanged the same look. This was getting entirely too unnerving for me. "All right, what's going on here?" She hesitated and then asked me flat out if anything else strange had occurred before I discovered the smell. That was when I knew for sure that something other than Denmark was rotten here. When I told them about what sounded like a bouncing ball, they both literally turned white, so I sat back and listened. During the construction of the new wing, one of the construction workers had brought his son to work. Apparently, he was working with the crew on the cement pour to connect the exterior walls of the main building to the new wing. The kid was supposedly at a safe distance, but somehow lost control of his ball, and it went bouncing towards the pour. The boy tried to catch the ball, but just as it fell between the walls, lost his balance and fell in after it. Since the body was lodged in the cement between two monstrous-sized exterior walls, it was literally unrecoverable. It became his tomb. She told me that other people had similar experiences with smells, sounds, and even sightings, but for me, that was more than enough. I don't know how I never heard about that, but given the tragedy of the event, it's not surprising that it was respectfully played down. I was told that a memorial plate was placed in a little garden area outside of the street entrance to the institute. I had never even noticed it from my car before, until the next day. When I was a toddler, I had this caterpillar toy I would play with all the time, and it would talk and spell out the alphabet. So one night, as my mother and I were sleeping in her room, she woke up to the sound of the caterpillar going off in my room next to hers. She was confused because she remembered it being off. My mother then got up and went inside my room to turn it off, but once she heard what it was saying, she immediately frightened. The caterpillar toy was spelling out the F word over and over again. She picked up the toy and went to turn it off again, but like how she remembered, it said it was off. Being even more freaked out, she took out the batteries and went outside to throw it in the dumpster because she did not want that demonic toy in the house. Her telling this story to me when I was older made me question a lot of things that happened in that house because other weird things happened as well, but thank goodness we moved away years ago. Thinking back, it makes absolutely no sense why the toy would have spelled out that word because it was a toy made for children and it had been off. So maybe there was a bad energy living in that house of some kind, but who knows, honestly. I do remember, however, being scared all the time to go inside my room. It felt like I was being watched constantly by something. I would refuse to sleep in there, so I ended up sleeping with my mom inside her room where I felt more safe. I would constantly have the same nightmare over and over again each night for a long time, but one day it just stopped. In the nightmare, I would be looking out the windows of my house and I would see this train. I would try to hide from it because I knew it was watching me and wanted to hurt me. It's weird, I know, but it's even more weird that I would dream about this each night and had this feeling of being watched all the time. My mother later told me that she always did feel uneasy in that house as well. Ever since I can remember, I have always had a love for the paranormal. I was raised in a household that believed in spirits, even though we were Christian. My mother even claimed to have precognition. She would get bad feelings and images of things that would happen. She was almost never wrong. I've strayed here a bit, but I wanted to provide some insight. I was never taught to be afraid. I never even thought it was real, to be completely honest. That was until my grandmother died. She wasn't just some old lady that we visited begrudgingly. She was my best friend, a mentor, someone that always understood. You could go to her with the worst thing you had ever done, and you would leave with peace and love in your heart. And of course, since she was a wonderful person, she had cancer. Soft tissue cancer so rare it took doctors years to diagnose it. It was terrible. She went through the whole 9 yards. Chemo, radiation, experimental medicine. It did nothing to slow the tumors from growing. Finally, she decided to opt for quality over quantity. I lived with her for 2 years and took care of her. It would never amount to all that she did for me, but it was something I could do for this angel of a person. I watched the cancer change her from a high-spirited, sharp-witted woman to a bedridden shell of a person. She was in so much pain, she was losing her mind. Dementia ran in her family and she was showing the signs. Every other conversation was how she was ready to die, ready to see her husband, my grandfather, again. We would watch ghost shows together, daydream about contacting the dead. She told me that when she died, she would come back and send me signs. The time came and she got her wish. She died that fall. I was devastated. I desperately searched for the signs that she had promised, but I got nothing. I was so lost and hurt. I didn't know what to do. I'd lay in bed at night and talk into the darkness in my room. I would obsess over the paranormal, even downloaded Ouija boards on my phone. I would do EVP sessions. Still, I got nothing. I resigned myself to the thought that there was no life after death. God was a lie. There was no point to it all. It took years to heal. Who knows? Maybe I am still damaged. I only started noticing strange things 2 years after she died. I moved away to a different state. I needed a change. The new place was not isolated or old. It had only about 3 previous tenants, all alive and well. I checked. It started with odd feelings, like someone was there, voices down the hall in my kids' room. A water bottle was actually thrown across the dining room. I came up with logical reasons for it all. The walls were thin. The bottle could have been sitting on something unbalanced. Until one night when I was sitting on the couch. It was late. Everyone was asleep. I felt like someone was staring at me, glaring even, like they were standing in the hallway ready to run at me. There was cold in the air that sunk into my chest. I was absolutely terrified. I did not understand why. It lasted for what seemed like hours, but was only actually a few minutes. I went straight to bed. A few weeks later, we moved to a different city to an apartment. It was from the 80s and not very well kept up. The owner lost it in a card game, we were told from the other tenants. So when I heard odd noises, I thought nothing of it. I would feel like someone walked into a room, only to look up and see no one. I sat on the couch in the living room and saw the recliner just start moving. No one even close to it. No pets to brush up next to it. There would be small pops and cracks like someone dropping something metal. I would never go to investigate. It was like it wanted to be known. The more I ignored it, the worse it got. In the middle of watching a movie, I felt the couch sink ever so slightly. Then a tingly cold feeling slowly moved over my hand up my arm. On everything I own, it felt like a hand brushing up my arm. It felt lonely. I had a strange feeling like it was just a person longing for human interaction. I told it out loud. I know you're here. As long as you leave my kids alone, I'm okay with you being here. Something in me told me that it understood. I could not explain how or why. I just felt it in my heart. The activity had almost completely stopped after that. It was months until I actually saw it. I was alone in the house. I was lying on the couch looking at my phone. All of a sudden, I felt it was there. I looked up, and to the left saw a white shadowy figure in the shape of a person. It walked from my left to the right in an odd way, like it was taking large steps. I jumped up and ran out of the apartment. Before you start to think about it being just my eyes staring at my phone, the shape was not rectangular like my phone. It was higher up than I was holding my phone. It was human shape. It took hours and a lot of cigarettes to work up the courage to go back inside. I closed the door behind me and spoke to it again. You have to leave now. You're not welcome here anymore. I do not want to see you, and I don't want you here. I was so scared I just wanted it to leave, whoever or whatever it was. I didn't care anymore. It made my anxiety so much worse. It seemed to work. A year later, we moved again. This apartment was warm and homely. I felt good there. It had the aura of a welcoming home. It was a year before I felt anything, but God help me, it did. It happened again. Again, it started with strange feelings, like someone was there staring at me. Drawers opening by themselves, cold spots in odd places. My dog would bark at random places in the apartment. It was only once, but she even growled and barked. She is an English bulldog and very sweet and quiet like her breed usually is. It was the first and only time she growled. I feel like either I am being followed by the same spirit, or I am attracting them somehow. I have theorized that maybe my constant videos and movies and TV shows about ghosts and demons may have opened the communications. Maybe I had invited them. It is scary and exciting all at the same time. I want to know more, but am afraid of the consequences. Can anyone provide insight? Maybe tell me what I did to start all of this. This happened back when I lived in the old house where I grew up. It was built in the 1930s or 40s. Nothing ever happened that my skeptical mind didn't dismiss as some mental trickery. Stuff like seeing someone move by out of the corner of my eye or hear people talking when no one else there. On occasions, something would happen that even I couldn't explain, like when the old peaceful dog would start growling at the closed basement door, only for me to open it and go down there to find nothing weird, or hearing someone walking up the old and very creaky stairs, but I would look down and, again, nothing would be on the steps. It all just seemed normal, though, as I had grown up with this stuff, so I didn't put much thought into these things. That was until one night. I was lying in bed, which was next to the second-floor window, so I could turn and look right out the window while lying down. It was about 1 a.m, and I couldn't fall asleep, so I was just staring at the cluster of tall pine trees in one of the nearby backyards. There wasn't much going on out there, but that's when I saw something in one of the higher-up branches of the trees, like a large shadow or something. My eyes focused on it, because it was almost the size of a full-grown adult, but it was climbing on all fours when its back hunched up like a scared cat. Not to mention that it was on a very thin branch too small to support something of its weight, almost 80 feet in the air. The thing sort of shuffled around the branch, which bent slightly and swayed with its movements. It moved from the shadow of a higher branch, and I noticed it had light tan Caucasian skin, and it looked almost malnourished. For a while, I just stared, racking my brain for an explanation, trying to think of any kind of animal that would look like that and was native to the Midwest. Then, as though startled by something, it turned its head around, scanning the ground far below. Its face had a large-looking mouth with no noticeable nose, and what looked like one large eye socket, a shadow cast over its eye. It looked down, and then it began to move its gaze upward, looking over the rooftops for something. Then it looked right at me. We just stared at each other for what felt like hours, its eyes still hidden in shadow. Then, slowly, it backed into the tree, the branch bouncing slightly as it backed away, then stopped moving after the thing disappeared. I never saw the thing again after that, maybe because I moved soon after, but even after almost a year, I still can't get the emotionless face out of my mind. I can't find any kind of urban legends or myths about anything like that. So if anyone knows about this mysterious creature, please, I would like to know. Hey friends, thanks for listening. Be sure to subscribe and click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. If you got a story, be sure to submit them to my subreddit, r/letsreadofficial, and give and receive feedback from the community, and maybe even hear your story featured on the next video. And join my Discord to interact with me and other listeners directly. And if you want to support me even more, grab early access to all future narrations for just $1 a month on Patreon, and maybe even pick up some Let's Read merch on Spreadshirt. Links in the bio. Thanks so much, friends, and I'll see you again soon.